He thought it was a joke. Just a man in a funny hat, standing too still in a red coat? A former US president. Trump ordered him to salute, but the guard didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even look at him. And what happened next? It shut down an entire courtyard and left one of the world's loudest men completely silent. Because this wasn't about politics. It was about tradition and what real discipline looks like when someone tries to humiliate it. You won't believe what the guard finally said or how Trump responded. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. There's something about an early spring morning at Windsor that feels like tradition is breathing, crisp, dignified, unshakable. The air carries the scent of polished brass and ancient stone, warmed by a shy sun. The courtyard gleamed with a quiet, meticulous rhythm. Security patrolling their designated points, tourists flowing politely along roped pathway, and the Union Jack high above, snapping smartly against the pale sky. A stillness lingered, structured, ceremonial, nothing out of place. That's what made the noise of tires so jarring. 3 hulking black SUVs rolled through the inner gates with a low diplomatic growl, unannounced, unscheduled, not part of the rotation. The convoy had the unmistakable gloss of American muscle. Smoked windows, steel plating, reinforced side mirrors that hinted at the weight they carried. A whisper of confusion passed through the crowd. Tourists instinctively raised their phones, some zooming in, others just filming. Even the palace staff along the inner arches exchanged glances. And yet, at the very centre of it all, utterly unmoved, stood Staff Sergeant Daniel Keaton. 37 years old, Coldstream Guard, veteran of multiple Helmand tours. His tall black bearskin hat towered over the line of crimson and brass, and his scarlet tunic held no creases, no distractions. The rifle rested against his shoulder in regulation stillness. Not a twitch betrayed the fact that he had immediately registered the break in protocol, not a blink. The scar across the second knuckle of his right hand, barely visible beneath the fold of his white glove, was the only outward sign of where he'd been. It came from the edge of a shattered truck door in Sangin province, Afghanistan, where he'd held a perimeter for hours while his convoy cleared a path for wounded civilians. He never told that story. Most who wore red at Windsor didn't, because here the past wasn't performance, it was presence. Keaton didn't look at the convoy. He didn't need to. His body remained fused to centuries of protocol, posture moulded not by ego, but by duty. The SUVs came to a stop, with a hiss of hydraulics near the central landing, just yards from the ceremonial line. Inside the rope barrier, a little girl whispered to her mother, "Why are the cars here now?" The mother replied gently, without taking her eyes off the vehicles. "They weren't supposed to be." From inside the lead SUV, a door opened, and a pair of black shoes touched the courtyard stone with authority. The quiet balance of the morning was about to break. And the man who stepped out next wasn't here to observe. He was here to take the spotlight. He stepped out like he owned the place. Dark navy overcoat draped over his shoulders, long red tie hanging just a bit too low, hair arranged in that familiar wind-defying shape. It was unmistakable. Donald J. Trump, former President of the United States, had arrived at Windsor Castle without prior notice, without a security protocol clearance, and certainly without ceremony. A ripple moved through the tourists. Some gasped, others raised phones higher. A few older visitors lowered theirs instead, sensing that what was unfolding wasn't part of any guided tour. Trump surveyed the courtyard like a man inspecting a property he might purchase. His eyes swept over the flagpoles, the arches, and finally the line of royal guards standing motionless at their posts. He smirked. "Still doing the whole medieval cosplay thing, huh?" he muttered, just loud enough for his personal aide to hear, though not quiet enough to avoid the microphones nearby. You'd think with all this pomp and marble, they'd spring for a security system made after the Cold War. The joke fell flat, with the British staff standing along the side. Faces remained professionally blank, though a few pairs of eyes blinked a touch slower. One liaison glanced subtly toward the mounted CCTV dome above the eastern arch. Another gently shifted a step closer to the edge of the protocol row. Trump took a step forward and turned to one of his video staff. "Get a shot of this guy," he said, gesturing towards Staff Sergeant Keaton, who hadn't flinched. Absolutely incredible. Standing there like he thinks he's guarding a time machine. Reminds me of those people who freeze in Times Square for tips. The American press team gave tight manufactured chuckles. The British staff didn't even twitch. One of them, a young Foreign Office official, scribbled something quickly on a clipboard and whispered into her lapel mic. Keaton remained motionless. The bearskin hat above his head caught the wind for a half-second, but his chin stayed level. Eyes locked on a fixed point beyond Trump. Every contour of his uniform remained unshaken, not because he didn't hear, but because hearing wasn't relevant to holding post. Trump continued, voice rising. "Imagine dressing like that for a job," he said. "Bet it's boiling under there. Poor guy probably hasn't blinked in a decade." Near the ropes, an older man muttered under his breath, "That's the idea." And the crowd began to shift, just slightly. The line between amusement and discomfort was beginning to blur. Trump adjusted his cufflinks, grinned toward the cameras, and stepped forward again, this time off the designated path. "This one's mine," he said. "Let's see if he knows who's boss." The rope barrier was there for a reason. Even the youngest tourists understood it. The invisible line between pageantry and protection. You could take photos, sure. Smile, wave, maybe whisper to your kids. But you didn't cross it. Not unless you were ready to be removed, corrected, or worse. Remembered for the wrong reasons. But Trump didn't hesitate. He stepped over the guideline with the casual arrogance of someone who'd spent his entire life treating boundaries as optional. His polished shoes crunched lightly on the carefully raked gravel as he closed the distance between himself and Staff Sergeant Keaton. Secret Service agents exchanged glances but made no move to stop him. A senior British aide opened her mouth to protest but closed it again. No one wanted to be the one responsible for an international headline. Trump stopped just short of Keaton's position. 3 feet. 2, maybe. His eyes scanned the length of the guard's uniform, like he was inspecting a prop. He turned his head slightly toward the cameras, still filming from a respectful distance. "You know," he said loudly, "in the United States, we train our soldiers to salute their president. Every branch, every rank, even the Marines. Great people." He took a half-step closer. "Tell me something, soldier. You salute your commander, don't you?" Keaton didn't move. Not a blink, not even the suggestion of one. Trump let out a small laugh. "Well, I'm a former commander-in-chief, still am to a lot of people, and I think that deserves a little recognition, don't you?" One of his aides whispered behind him. "Sir, he's not permitted to break position." Trump waved him off. "Relax, this is cultural exchange." Then, turning fully to Keaton, he issued the words like a stage direction. "That's an order. Salute me." Silence. Even the tourists had gone still, phones lowered ever so slightly. The shifting of feet on gravel became the loudest sound in the courtyard. Keaton remained statuesque, hands fixed on his rifle, heels locked, shoulders squared, with almost inhuman precision. It wasn't just stillness, it was presence. Trump's expression tightened just a fraction. He wasn't used to being ignored, least of all by men in uniform. The former president glanced sideways toward his closest bodyguard, a broad-shouldered man in mirrored sunglasses. With a subtle nod, he gestured toward the guard. The agent hesitated, then slowly stepped forward, stopping just shy of the ceremonial rope line. Trump folded his arms and grinned. Let's see if he's just stubborn, or if someone forgot to remind him who's in charge. But in that moment, even the crowd could tell. Keaton knew exactly who he answered to, and it wasn't the man in front of him. The agent didn't cross the rope line, not yet. He stood there, a breath inside the boundary, clearly weighing whether nudging a ceremonial British soldier would be classified as diplomacy or disaster. Meanwhile, the crowd had changed. The tourists, once gleefully filming what seemed like a novelty encounter, were now quiet, phones still in hand, but held lower. Their faces had gone from entertained to uncertain. Something about the tension in the air didn't feel staged anymore. And then a voice, low, steady, cut through the quiet like a thread, stitching the moment together. "That man's no mannequin," said an elderly gentleman near the front. He wore a dark wool coat with a military pin on the lapel, his white hair neatly combed. Served in Helmand twice. Coldstream Guard, through and through. A few heads turned. Someone nearby asked, "You know him?" The old man nodded. Staff Sergeant Daniel Keaton led a corridor extraction and a fire, protected a convoy carrying wounded civilians. Mortars were falling. He held his post until every last one made it out. Didn't move until the final engine cleared. One woman let out a soft breath. Another lowered her phone entirely. "You see that scar on his glove hand?" the man continued. "Shrapnel from that day. Never had it fixed. Said he wanted to remember what silence cost." Trump, still standing far too close, hadn't heard the exchange. He was too focused on his target, still waiting for a flinch, a blink, something. A child near the rope barrier tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mum? Is that man allowed to tell the soldier what to do?" The mother hesitated, then leaned down. "No, darling, he's not. And the soldier knows that." Trump gestured toward Keaton again, exasperated now. "Still nothing? I've had NATO generals salute me without blinking. This guy thinks he's made of stone." Behind him, his aides shifted awkwardly. The British liaison officer made another soft call into her lapel mic. Still, Keaton did not move, but the people around him had. One by one, shoulders began to straighten. Conversations quieted. Even the flash on the American press camera stopped blinking. It was as if the stillness was spreading, not from intimidation, from respect. Trump took another step closer, clearly irritated, but it was too late. The narrative had already flipped. This wasn't a man in costume resisting a VIP. This was a soldier holding his ground against someone who didn't understand what ground even meant, and the world was watching. Trump's face shifted from amusement to irritation. The smirk lingered, but the glint behind his eyes had changed. He wasn't getting the reaction he expected. And in Trump's world, silence wasn't just defiance. It was unacceptable. He turned sharply toward his lead Secret Service agent, gestured back toward Keaton, and said, much louder this time for the crowd to hear, "Get him out of the frame." The words landed like a slap. The agent blinked. "Sir?" "You heard me," Trump said, waving his hand impatiently. "This guy's blocking the shot. I want the castle, not Buckingham's best-dressed statue." There was an audible shift in the air. The kind of moment when time slows slightly and everyone senses a boundary about to be tested. The agent hesitated, then took a step forward. Keaton didn't move, not an inch. His boots held firm in that gravel, like they were anchored to centuries. The agent crossed the rope line, and that's when she appeared. From the left arch of the courtyard, a tall woman in a Royal Household Navy uniform stepped forward, measured, composed, absolutely unhurried. Major Eleanor Price, Office of Ceremonial Protocol, no introduction needed. Anyone who worked near the palace knew the name. She wasn't loud, she didn't need to be. She intercepted the agent with a hand raised in smooth, practiced motion, one that required no words to carry authority. "Stop there, please," she said calmly. The agent paused. His eyes flicked to Trump, who was watching with folded arms. Price didn't break stride. She stepped slightly to the side, so she stood between the guard and the American, heels perfectly aligned with the rope line. "This is an active ceremonial post," she said, her voice low but unmistakable, "under Ministry of Defence jurisdiction." The agent opened his mouth to respond, but she continued without pause. Royal Guards are not to be repositioned, addressed, or physically engaged by foreign delegations. That includes members of former administrations. Trump took a half step forward. "He's in my shot." Price didn't blink. "He's in his post." The crowd was dead silent now. Even the pigeons nesting above the courtyard balconies seemed to hold their breath. "Happy to assist your team in finding another angle," Price added, her tone unfailingly polite. "But this guard remains exactly where he is," Trump scoffed. "You people and your little traditions." Price inclined her head just slightly. "Tradition, sir, is what built this courtyard. Disruption is what visits it." Trump didn't respond, but the tension had shifted again. Because the moment he tried to move a man who refused to move, he'd exposed what real immovability looks like. He should have walked away. Every advisor, every aide behind the rope line, even the younger Secret Service agents, fresh out of Washington, suits crisp and nerves fraying, they all knew it. They could see the shift in the crowd. This wasn't theatre anymore. It was something else, something heavier. But Trump? Trump only saw one thing, an audience. So he doubled down. He stepped even closer, narrowing the space between himself and Staff Sergeant Daniel Keaton until there were barely 2 feet of gravel between them. No barriers now, just one man demanding attention and another refusing to grant it. "You even blink under that hat?" Trump asked mockingly. "Or do they glue your eyelids open when you sign up for this costume show?" He leaned in slightly, exaggerated like a performer playing to the back row. "Come on, soldier, you don't have to pretend for me. I get it. Whole thing's a photo op, right?" Just standing there so tourists feel like they're in a Bond movie. Keaton didn't twitch, so Trump took a risk. He pulled a press badge from his inside coat pocket and dangled it, right in front of Keaton's unflinching face. The laminated tag bobbed slightly in the breeze, inches from the tip of the soldier's bare skin. "Nothing?" Trump said, now sounding half challenged, half amused. "Not even a flinch? You guys aren't allowed to talk, huh? What happens if I wave this in your face? You explode?" From across the courtyard, someone audibly gasped. Major Eleanor Price stood motionless a few steps behind, but her presence was still a shield, one made not of sound, but of expectation. "Sir," she said with quiet firmness, "you are now within 3 feet of an active military post. I must ask you to step back." Trump glanced over his shoulder. "I'm a guest." "You are a guest of the Crown," she replied, her voice calm but unyielding. "Not its commander." He turned back toward Keaton, still hoping for a crack. A blink would do, but nothing came. "Unbelievable," he muttered, exasperated. "In my country, soldiers follow orders. They salute their president." He took a step back, addressing the crowd now. "I've been saluted by admirals, marines, Israeli commandos, even the French, and they hardly salute their own. And this guy, this statue, won't even acknowledge the President of the United States?" He faced Keaton again, voice sharper. "Salute your ally. That's an order." A beat of silence, then another. But still, Keaton held the line, unmoved, unbothered, unavailable, and around them the courtyard began to feel heavier. Not because of noise, but because of the absence of it. Even the birds had gone quiet, because somewhere deep inside the crowd, people were starting to realize this wasn't a man resisting disrespect. This was a soldier protecting something far older than pride. The silence in the courtyard was almost unnatural, not the kind that happens when no one's speaking, but the kind that takes over when everyone realizes they've just crossed into something sacred. Trump stood glaring at Keaton, the order still echoing faintly in the space between them. But it hadn't landed. Not really, because no amount of shouting, smirking, or swagger could breach the fortress of stillness that stood before him. And then new footsteps, measured, deliberate, coming from the palace archway. A tall man in a long charcoal grey coat emerged, his stride steady but unhurried. Silver hair, medals faintly gleaming beneath his lapel. The kind of presence that didn't need introduction. General Sir Robert Maldon, former commander of the Household Division, decorated for 3 decades of ceremonial and operational leadership. A man who had personally trained multiple generations of guards, and the final word on royal protocol for anyone who knew how tradition worked. He didn't look at Trump, not yet. His eyes scanned the scene, tourists frozen, phones lowered, the American security detail visibly tense. He looked at Major Price, who offered the faintest nod of deference. Then he stepped forward, past the line of aides, past the rope, past the awkward press cluster. And he stood beside Keaton, just close enough to be heard by both men. Then, with quiet clarity, he said the words no one expected. "Staff Sergeant Keaton, you may speak freely." A ripple went through the crowd. Keaton didn't look at the general, didn't break posture, but his right hand shifted slightly, rebalancing the weight of his rifle, not as a break in formation, but as a signal, a pivot, like the closing of a gate. And then, for the first time all day, he moved. Not dramatically, just a slight turn of the head, no more than 10 degrees, enough to make it known he had heard everything. And now he would respond. His eyes never met Trump's. They stayed fixed ahead, steady and clear. But his voice, deep, composed, almost quiet, carried through the courtyard like a drum beat in a stone hall. "This uniform doesn't answer to ego. The words hit like thunder, not because they were loud, but because they were true. You could hear it, the sharp breath of someone near the front, the whispered, "Oh my God," from a woman filming with her hand over her mouth. Even Trump's own aides went still, as if afraid to draw focus from the moment. Trump stood there, blinking, and for the first time that morning, he had nothing to say. The silence that followed was total. No camera shutters, no coughing, not even the scrape of a shoe on stone, just the weight of those 7 words. "This uniform doesn't answer to ego." They echoed through the courtyard like a bell tolling for the end of something. Trump stood exactly where he was, arms half-crossed, mid-gesture, like he'd been caught in the freeze frame of his own performance. His mouth opened, then closed again. There was no comeback, no jab, no applause line to ride out on, because the crowd wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Staff Sergeant Keaton, the man who hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't flinched. And now, having said only one sentence, had somehow seized the moment without even raising his voice. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Someone exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for 5 minutes. A young man near the back lowered his phone and whispered, "That's what discipline looks like." Trump shifted his weight uncomfortably. He looked around, expecting anyone to step in. But his aides had fallen silent. Major Price stood with hands calmly behind her back, face unreadable. General Malden remained where he was, eyes forward, unmoved. Trump let out a forced chuckle, trying to reset the mood. "Well, I guess that's a no, huh?" he said, aiming it toward the crowd. "Tough guy here. Maybe he'll salute when the king comes out." But no one laughed. The crowd didn't flinch. And now the tension wasn't between Trump and the guard. It was between Trump and everyone else. The very space that had once been his stage had become a quiet arena of reckoning, and in that moment, perhaps more from instinct than intention, Trump did something no one expected. He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, and raised his hand, not high, not with flourish, just a small, almost hesitant motion to his temple, a salute. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't regulation, but it was unmistakable. A former president of the United States, saluting a British royal guard who had refused to yield to him. A child near the rope raised her hand in imitation, then another, then a tourist in a bucket hat, then the veteran who'd whispered about Helmand, quietly, respectfully, without fanfare. They weren't saluting Trump, they were saluting Keaton, the man who didn't ask for attention, didn't ask for permission, didn't ask for power. He simply stood, and by doing so, had taken the entire moment away from the man who thought he owned it. Trump lowered his hand and took a slow step backward, as if unsure whether he was retreating or resetting. His eyes swept the courtyard, but no one rushed in to reclaim his spotlight. No one cheered, no one snapped photos, because the moment was no longer his. It belonged to the man who hadn't moved. Staff Sergeant Daniel Keaton resumed his full forward posture. Gaze locked ahead, boots rooted with the kind of certainty that doesn't need explanation. The salute had passed through him like wind through old stone, registered perhaps, but never absorbed. It wasn't meant for him personally, it was meant for what he represented, and that meant he didn't need to respond. Trump's security detail quietly reassembled behind him. The press team began slowly packing away their gear. One of the younger aides, barely out of university by the look of him, asked a question under his breath, but no one answered. The crowd still hadn't moved. Even Major Price remained in place, her face unreadable, her posture unchanged. She gave a faint nod to General Malden, who returned it with the gravity of a man who'd seen far worse than awkward politics. And then, as if on cue, almost impossibly timed, a faint rhythm began to rise from the far end of the courtyard. Boots. 4 at first, then 12, then more. The changing of the guard had begun. The heavy cadence of synchronized marching filled the space like a drumline of history itself, steady, disciplined, undeniable. The tourists turned, as if remembering they were in the presence of something older than any of them. The guardsmen approached in full formation, rifles angled, tunics sharp, black bearskins rising and falling with each perfect step. Trump, seeing the movement, took his cue. He turned without a word and walked toward the SUV that had brought him. Not fast, not triumphant, just quieter. He stepped inside without waving. The door closed softly. The convoy began its slow roll back through the inner gates, the tires whispering over the gravel like a coda to a song that hadn't ended the way he'd written it. Back in the courtyard, Keaton remained still. The relief unit reached him. One final drumbeat signalled the rotation. And then, without pause, without showmanship, Keaton turned and marched off the line. Perfect step, perfect angle, disappearing beneath the stone archway like he'd never even been there. No applause followed him, no music, no ceremony, just the stunned silence of people who had watched something real happen, and the deep, unspoken understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is nothing at all. If you were standing in that guard's boots, would you have spoken up the way Keaton did? Or stayed silent all the way through? And do you think Trump's salute was genuine? Or just a last-ditch attempt to save face in front of the crowd? Maybe the bigger question is this: should centuries-old military protocol bend for powerful visitors? Or should it stand firm, no matter who's watching? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this moment made you rethink what real discipline looks like, go ahead and tap that like button. It truly helps more than you know. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you never miss our daily Royal Guard story. And if you know someone who thinks these men in red are just for show, someone who doesn't understand what it really means to stand still, share this video with them. Other stories should already be appearing on your screen now. Click one next, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that proves respect isn't demanded, it's earned, and real tradition doesn't flinch.